The morning alarm screamed through the dormitory at exactly 0500 hours. Rex Williams rolled off his narrow bunk and landed on the cold metal floor with practiced silence. Around him, 24 alien recruits stirred from their various sleeping positions. Some hung from the ceiling like bats, others coiled in neat spirals, and a few glowed softly as they recharged their energy cores. Rex had been at the Galactic Defense Academy for 3 months now, and he still felt like a mouse in a den of lions. The Academy sat on Kepler 7b, a harsh moon where gravity pulled twice as hard as Earth normal and the air tasted like metal shavings. Every other species here seemed built for war, while humans looked like they belonged in a library. The shower room was a nightmare of alien biology. Gornax the Bruthari stood 8 feet tall and needed 4 separate shower heads for his 4 arms. His gray skin looked like living armor, and Rex had seen him bend steel bars during strength tests. Next to him, Shade the insectoid warrior cleaned her razor-sharp limbs with mechanical precision. Her black carapace gleamed like polished obsidian, and her compound eyes never missed anything. Rex squeezed between them to reach a human-sized shower stall. The water was always too cold and smelled of chemicals needed to keep it safe for different alien biologies. He scrubbed quickly while listening to the others talk about today's challenge. "Finally, a real test," rumbled Zephon, the Keth crystal being whose body hummed with contained energy. "I grow tired of these classroom exercises." "Agreed," hissed Strike, a serpentine Nagari whose scales shifted color with his mood. Currently, they showed excited orange patterns. "My venom sacs ache for proper use." Rex dried off with a rough towel and wondered what his father would think of him now. Back on Earth, Dad ran a construction company and had taught Rex everything about reading terrain, understanding load-bearing structures, and making the most of available materials. Skills that seemed useless when surrounded by aliens who could melt steel with their thoughts or bite through titanium. The mess hall buzzed with nervous energy. Rex picked at his nutrient paste while the others devoured meals suited to their various biologies. Whisper the Umbral fed on shadows in a corner, his dark form barely visible. Nova the energy being absorbed raw electricity from a charging station. Morg, another Bruthari, consumed what looked like crushed rocks mixed with liquid nitrogen. "Attention, recruits!" Commander Thane's voice boomed through the speakers. The grizzled veteran appeared on the viewing screens, his tentacles coiled behind his battle-scarred face. "Report to Combat Zone 7 in 15 minutes. Full survival gear only." Rex felt his stomach drop. Combat Zone 7 was the harshest training ground on the entire moon. Miles of rocky canyons, unstable terrain, and environmental hazards that had claimed more than a few recruits over the years. Whatever they were about to face, it would not be a classroom exercise. The transport ship shuddered as it descended toward the combat zone. Through the small windows, Rex could see endless stretches of gray rock, broken by deep canyons and jagged peaks. The landscape looked like someone had taken a planet and put it through a blender, then left the pieces scattered across the surface. "Look at that terrain," Gornax laughed, his voice like grinding stone. "Perfect for real combat. No soft surfaces or gentle slopes to coddle the weak." Rex studied the view with different eyes. He saw the way certain rock formations leaned against each other, how water had carved specific patterns through the stone, where loose scree had collected in natural choke points. His grandfather had been a mining engineer and had taught him to read stone like other people read books. Every crack told a story of pressure and time. Every pile of rubble revealed the forces that had shaped it. The transport touched down with a bone-jarring impact. Commander Thane stood at the rear hatch, his expression grim as he surveyed the recruits. "Today you face the most important test of your academy training. This is not about strength or speed or natural weapons. This is about survival." The hatch opened with a hiss, letting in the thin, cold air of the combat zone. The assembled recruits filed out onto a rocky platform overlooking miles of hostile terrain. Rex pulled his survival pack tighter and checked that his water recycler was working properly. "The rules are simple," Thane continued, his voice carrying clearly in the thin atmosphere. "You have until sunset to reach the extraction point 15 kilometers north of here. The terrain will test every skill you have learned. Some of you will not make it." A few of the larger aliens chuckled at this, flexing claws and testing energy weapons built into their biology. Rex noticed several of them eyeing him with what looked like pity. The weak human would probably be the first eliminated. However, Thane's voice cut through their confidence. "There is one additional rule. This is a combat exercise. You are not just racing to reach the extraction point, you are competing against each other. Only the last 5 recruits standing will advance to the elite training program." The mood changed instantly. Allies became enemies, friends became targets. Rex felt every alien gaze shift toward him with predatory interest. In a straight fight, he would last maybe 30 seconds against any one of them. "No manufactured weapons are permitted," Thane added. "You may use only what nature gave you and what you can find or make from the environment. Medical beacons will extract any recruit who is seriously injured or calls for help." A horn echoed across the wasteland, its sound bouncing off canyon, walls, and fading into the distance. The test had officially begun. Rex watched the other recruits scatter in different directions, most heading straight north toward the extraction point. A few of the more cunning ones spread out to flank the obvious routes. Within minutes, the sounds of combat began echoing from the canyon system ahead. Rex shouldered his pack and headed east, away from the main group. Let them fight each other while he figured out the real challenge. His grandfather had always said that the smartest fighters were the ones who understood the battlefield better than anyone else. The rocky ground crunched under his boots as he made his way toward a series of narrow canyons that would provide cover from the larger predators while he developed a plan. Behind him, roars and energy discharges marked the beginning of what would be a very long day. The first explosion came from the main canyon, followed by a roar that shook loose stones from the cliff walls. Rex crouched behind a boulder and tried to identify the source. Through his field binoculars, he could see Zephon facing off against 3 smaller aliens in a natural amphitheater of rock. The Keth warrior's crystalline body blazed with stored energy as he prepared to defend himself. The energy discharge lit up the entire canyon like lightning. When Rex's vision cleared, 2 of the smaller aliens were unconscious, and their emergency beacons were flashing. Zephon stood over them, his crystal form still humming with power. The third alien, a quick-moving Velocian named Dart, had already fled deeper into the canyon system. Rex lowered his binoculars and checked his map. The direct route to the extraction point would take him right through that combat zone, where the strongest aliens were already establishing territory. He needed a different approach, something that would let him avoid the major conflicts while the others eliminated each other. The Eastern Canyon system offered possibilities. It was longer and more dangerous, with unstable rock formations and narrow passages that could trap unwary travelers. Most of the other recruits would avoid it, seeing it as unnecessarily risky. But Rex had grown up around construction sites and mine shafts. He knew how to read dangerous terrain and turn its hazards into advantages. He started down a steep slope covered in loose scree. Each step had to be placed carefully to avoid starting a rock slide that would give away his position. The thin air made every breath a struggle, and the higher gravity turned his pack into a crushing weight on his shoulders. Halfway down the slope, movement caught his eye. Shade the insectoid huntress was picking her way along a parallel ridge, her 6 legs, finding purchase on surfaces that would challenge a mountain goat. She moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator, and Rex realized she was tracking something. Following her line of sight, he spotted Whisper the Umbral trying to conceal himself in the shadow of a large boulder. The shadow shifter was nearly invisible, his dark form blending perfectly with the natural darkness. But Shade's compound eyes were designed to detect movement across multiple light spectrums. To her, Whisper probably stood out like a beacon. Rex watched the hunt unfold from his concealed position. Shade circled wide, using the canyon walls to approach from an unexpected angle. Whisper remained motionless, probably thinking he was perfectly hidden. The insectoid warrior struck with lightning speed, her barbed limbs seeking vital points. The fight was brief but vicious. Whisper's shadow-shifting abilities let him avoid the first few attacks, but Shade was relentless. Her acidic venom began eating through his natural armor, forcing him to trigger his emergency beacon before the damage became permanent. Another competitor eliminated. Rex made a mental note about Shade's hunting patterns and continued his descent. The loose rock here told a story of ancient water flow and tectonic shifts. Most people would see only dangerous terrain, but Rex saw the underlying structure that held everything together. More importantly, he saw the stress points where small changes could cause major results. At the bottom of the slope, he found evidence of the canyon's violent past. Huge boulders lay scattered like dice thrown by giants, some balanced precariously. On smaller stones, others wedged into cracks where they had fallen centuries ago. The patterns weren't random. Gravity, erosion, and geological forces had arranged them according to predictable rules. Rex pulled out his small geological survey kit, a standard piece of equipment that most recruits ignored in favor of more obviously useful gear. He tested the hardness of different rock samples, checked the stability of various formations, and mapped the stress patterns in the canyon walls. A distant roar echoed through the canyon system, followed by the sound of combat. Rex climbed to a vantage point and saw Gornax locked in battle with Nova, the energy being. The massive Bruthari was trying to grab his opponent, but Nova kept shifting between solid and energy states, making himself impossible to pin down. The energy being fired concentrated bolts of power at Gornax, each one capable of melting through steel armor. But the Bruthari's natural hide was incredibly tough, and he shrugged off attacks that would have vaporized most other species. He picked up a boulder the size of a small vehicle and hurled it at Nova with devastating accuracy. Nova barely managed to shift to energy form in time. The boulder smashed into the canyon wall where he had been standing, bringing down a small avalanche. But the effort of rapid form shifting was clearly draining him. His glow was becoming dimmer with each transformation. Rex studied the battle with professional interest. Both fighters were using brute force approaches, trying to overpower their opponent through superior firepower or physical strength. Neither was thinking about the environment as anything more than an obstacle to work around. The fight ended when Nova made a tactical error. He fired a full-power energy blast at Gornax, trying to end the battle quickly. But the Bruthari had positioned himself in front of a highly reflective mineral formation. The energy beam bounced off the crystalline surface and struck Nova from behind, disrupting his energy matrix and forcing him to trigger his emergency beacon. Gornax celebrated his victory with a triumphant roar that echoed through the entire canyon system. Rex winced at the noise. The big alien was advertising his position to every remaining competitor within miles. In a few minutes, other predators would start converging on this location. Rex slipped away from his vantage point and continued deeper into the eastern canyon system. The rock formations here were even more unstable, with entire sections of wall held in place by delicate balances of force and friction. A careless step in the wrong place could bring down tons of stone. Most recruits would see this as simply dangerous and avoid it. But Rex was beginning to understand that danger could be a weapon if you knew how to use it properly. Every unstable rock formation was a potential trap. Every narrow passage was a choke point where superior numbers or strength wouldn't matter. He found a sheltered alcove and sat down to study his map more carefully. The direct routes to the extraction point were probably controlled by the strongest fighters now. But there were other paths. harder to travel but offering advantages to someone who understood the terrain. Rex marked several locations on his map where the geology suggested interesting possibilities. Natural bottlenecks where a small rock slide could block pursuit, unstable formations that could be triggered by someone who knew exactly where to apply pressure, hidden passages that avoided the main combat zones entirely. As the afternoon wore on, the sounds of battle grew more distant. Rex could see smoke rising from several locations where energy weapons had started fires in the sparse vegetation. Emergency. Beacons flashed like scattered stars across the landscape as more competitors were eliminated. The remaining fighters would be the most dangerous ones, the natural predators who had survived by being stronger, faster, or more vicious than their eliminated competitors. Rex had no chance against any of them in a direct confrontation. But direct confrontation was not the only way to win a battle. Rex shouldered his pack and headed deeper into the canyon system, his mind already working on plans that would turn his apparent weaknesses into unexpected advantages. The narrow passage Rex had chosen wound deeper into the canyon system like a snake's path through stone. Ancient water had carved smooth curves in the rock walls, creating natural channels that told the story of flash floods and seasonal rains that had shaped this landscape over millions of years. Rex ran his fingers along the worn stone surfaces, reading the geology like a textbook. Here, the water had moved fast and carved deep. There, it had pooled and deposited sediment in layers that created weak points in the rock. Every mark on the stone revealed something about the forces that had created this maze of canyons. More importantly, it revealed how those same forces could be used again. Rex stopped at a section where the passage narrowed to barely shoulder width between two towering walls. The ground was covered with loose stones that had fallen from above, over countless years. Most people would see it as just another obstacle, but Rex saw something far more interesting. He knelt down and began sorting through the rubble with careful attention to size, weight, and shape. Some stones were perfectly round, worn smooth by ancient floods. Others were angular and sharp, recently broken from the walls above. A few were flat and broad, ideal for creating stable platforms or wedging into cracks. Working quickly but carefully, Rex began arranging the stones in a pattern that looked completely natural. To anyone passing through, it would appear to be just another pile of rockfall debris. But Rex was creating something much more sophisticated than it appeared. The key was understanding leverage and mechanical advantage. His father had taught him these principles when he was 12 years old, showing him how ancient peoples had moved massive stones to build pyramids and monuments using nothing but simple tools and clever thinking. The same principles worked whether you were building something or tearing it down. Rex placed a large, flat stone as a fulcrum point, then carefully arranged smaller rocks around it to create a trigger mechanism. When someone stepped on the trigger stone with enough weight, it would shift the fulcrum and release a carefully balanced pile of rocks that would come tumbling down from a natural shelf 15 feet above. The trap was nearly invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. Rex tested it carefully with a stick, making sure the mechanism would work reliably, but only when triggered by something heavy enough to be a threat. A small animal or piece of equipment wouldn't set it off, but anything the size of an adult alien would find itself dealing with several 100 pounds of falling stone. Satisfied with his work, Rex moved on to the next strategic location. The passage opened up into a small circular area where 3 different paths converged. Anyone pursuing him would have to choose which direction to follow, and this gave Rex an opportunity to influence that choice. He found a section of wall where the stone was heavily fractured, probably by ancient temperature changes or seismic activity. The cracks ran deep into the rock, creating weak points that could be exploited by someone who understood structural engineering. Rex used his belt knife to carefully widen some of the cracks, not enough to cause immediate collapse, but enough to destabilize the entire section. Then he arranged some obviously disturbed stones and scuff marks to suggest he had gone down the left passage, directly under the weakened wall section. Anyone tracking him would naturally follow the signs, and their footsteps would provide just enough vibration to trigger the carefully prepared collapse. The middle passage got a different treatment. Rex found a place where the floor was covered in a thin layer of sand and small pebbles, deposited by wind patterns that funneled through the canyon system. He spent 20 minutes creating what looked like naturally wind-blown patterns in the sand, but was actually a carefully disguised pit trap. The technique was older than recorded history, used by hunters and warriors since humans first learned, to outsmart prey that was bigger and stronger than they were. Rex had dug the pit only 2 feet deep, not enough to cause serious injury, but sufficient to trap someone long enough for them to realize they were being hunted rather than hunting. The right passage received the most sophisticated trap of all. Rex found a place where water had carved a smooth channel in the rock floor, creating a natural funnel that would direct anything moving through it toward a specific point. He spent an hour carefully arranging stones to create what engineers called a domino effect. One stone, when disturbed, would fall and strike another, which would fall and strike a third, and so on in a carefully calculated chain reaction. At the end of the chain, a heavy boulder balanced on a narrow ledge would come crashing down, not to injure, but to block the passage completely and trap whoever had triggered the mechanism. Rex worked with the focused intensity his grandfather had called engineer's mind, that mental state where every problem became a puzzle to be solved through the application of physics and logic. Each trap was a small machine built from natural materials, using gravity, leverage, and momentum as power sources. By the time he finished, the circular area looked completely unchanged. A casual observer would see only natural rock formations and the normal debris of geological processes. But Rex had turned the entire space into a sophisticated alarm system that would tell him exactly which direction his pursuers were coming from and slow them down long enough for him to prepare the next phase of his defense. As if summoned by his preparations, Rex heard voices echoing through the canyon system. He climbed quickly to a concealed observation point and peered back toward the main combat area. 3 aliens were moving in his direction, following his trail with the systematic patience of experienced hunters. Shade, the insectoid warrior, led the group, her compound eyes scanning for the subtle signs that Rex had been careful not to completely eliminate from his path. Behind her came Strike the Serpentine Nagari, his scales showing the focused yellow patterns that meant he was locked onto a scent trail. Bringing up the rear was Dart, the quick-moving Voloshian who had survived the earlier encounter with Zephon. They were working as a pack now, having apparently decided that the human represented enough of a threat to require cooperation. Rex felt a moment of pride mixed with terror. They were taking him seriously enough to hunt him as a group, which meant his tactics were working. It also meant he was now facing 3 deadly predators instead of 1. Rex slipped away from his observation point and headed deeper into the canyon system. His traps would buy him time and information, but they wouldn't stop determined hunters for long. He needed to find terrain that would give him even greater advantages, places where his understanding of physics and geology could turn the environment itself into his ally. Behind him, he heard the first trap trigger with a rumble of falling stones, followed by startled hisses and clicks from his pursuers. They had found his trail, but now they knew they were not just tracking prey. They were entering the domain of something that fought back in ways they had never encountered before. Rex smiled grimly and continued his retreat deeper into the maze of stone, his mind already working on the next set of problems to solve. Rex could hear his pursuers arguing behind him as they dealt with the aftermath of his first trap. Shade's angry clicking mixed with Strike's frustrated hissing and Dart's rapid chirping sounds. The rockfall had not injured anyone seriously, but it had forced them to spend precious time clearing the passage and had put them on guard for further surprises. More importantly, it had told Rex exactly which route they had chosen to follow. The left passage, just as he had hoped. They would encounter the unstable wall section in about 10 minutes, which gave him time to prepare his next surprise. Rex moved quickly through terrain that would have challenged a mountain climber, using handholds and footholds that his construction site experience had taught him to identify. The rock here was different from the softer stone near the entrance, harder and more stable, but also more brittle. It would fracture cleanly under the right kind of stress, creating sharp edges and unpredictable collapse patterns. He found what he was looking for in a section where the canyon narrowed into a bottleneck barely wide enough for one person at a time. The walls rose 30 feet on either side, and the floor was covered with a thin layer of loose pebbles that would make footing treacherous. But most importantly, the walls showed clear signs of previous rockfalls with fresh scars in the stone, where chunks had recently broken away. Rex studied the fracture patterns with the eye of someone who had spent years around controlled demolitions. His father's company had specialized in bringing down old buildings and unsafe structures, and Rex had learned to read stone and concrete the way other people read facial expressions. Every crack told a story about stress and weakness. Every discolored patch revealed where water had penetrated and caused expansion damage. High up on the left wall, a section of rock the size of a refrigerator hung precariously, held in place by what looked like solid stone, but was actually just a thin shell over a void created by ancient water erosion. The whole mass was balanced on a contact point no bigger than Rex's fist, and it would take very little additional stress to send it tumbling down. Rex found a long, straight stick among the debris on the canyon floor and used it to probe the wall carefully, testing different points until he found the exact spot where a small amount of pressure would create a catastrophic failure. Then he used his belt knife to carve a small notch in the stone, not enough to trigger immediate collapse, but enough to ensure that the next vibration or impact would finish the job. The sound of his pursuers grew louder as they worked their way through the previous trap site. Rex could hear Shade giving instructions in her clicking language, probably warning the others to watch for more surprises. They were learning, but they were still thinking like hunters chasing prey instead of soldiers entering a battlefield. Rex climbed quickly to a position where he could observe the bottleneck from safety and settled in to wait. From his concealed vantage point, he could see the entire approach route and would have plenty of warning before the hunters arrived. While he waited, Rex worked on his next trap. This one would be different from the others, designed not just to slow down his pursuers, but to separate them and force them to deal with multiple threats at once. The key was understanding how each alien's natural abilities would make them respond to danger. Shade the insectoid relied on her speed and climbing, ability to escape from threatening situations. Strike the Serpentine used his flexibility and venom to fight his way through obstacles. Dart the Voloshian depended on quick bursts of movement to avoid danger entirely. Each would react differently to the same threat, and Rex could use those differences against them. 20 minutes later, the first hunter appeared at the entrance to the bottleneck. Shade moved cautiously, her compound eyes scanning every surface for signs of disturbance. She had learned from the previous encounter and was being much more careful about her approach. Behind her, Strike slithered smoothly over the loose pebbles, his scaled body distributing weight evenly to avoid triggering any pressure-sensitive traps. Dart brought up the rear, his large eyes constantly moving as he searched for alternative routes or escape paths. Rex waited until all three aliens were in the bottleneck before he acted. Using his improvised lever, he applied precise pressure to the carefully prepared fracture point on the canyon wall. The response was immediate and dramatic. The refrigerator-sized chunk of stone broke free with a grinding roar that echoed through the canyon like thunder. But Rex had calculated its fall precisely, and instead of dropping straight down, it struck a protruding ledge that sent it bouncing across the narrow passage like a massive pinball. Shade reacted exactly as Rex had predicted. Her natural instinct was to climb and she scaled the opposite wall with incredible speed, using her specialized limbs to find purchase on surfaces that looked perfectly smooth. But her rapid movement triggered smaller rockfalls that Rex had carefully prepared in advance, forcing her to keep moving higher and higher to avoid the cascading debris. Strike coiled and struck at the falling rock with his powerful tail, trying to deflect the larger pieces away from his position. His natural armor protected him from most of the smaller stones, but his aggressive response brought him into contact with a section of wall that Rex had weakened earlier. The impact of his tail strike caused another controlled collapse that buried him under a carefully calculated pile of rubble. Dart tried to use his speed to escape back the way they had come, but found his retreat blocked by stones that seemed to fall in exactly the right places to cut off his escape route. Panicking, he triggered his emergency beacon rather than risk being trapped in the canyon. When the dust settled, one hunter was eliminated. One was trapped but not seriously injured, and one was stranded high on the canyon wall with no easy way down. Rex had effectively neutralized 3 dangerous predators using nothing but rocks, and his understanding of how different species would react to the same threat. But he was not finished yet. From his observation post, Rex could see more movement in the distance. Other competitors had heard the commotion and were coming to investigate. The sounds of combat would draw every remaining hunter in the area, turning his current advantage into a potential disaster. Rex climbed down from his position and quickly approached Strike's location. The serpentine alien was conscious, but effectively pinned under several hundred pounds of carefully placed stones. His emergency beacon was within reach, but he had not triggered it yet, probably hoping to free himself without admitting defeat. "Interesting technique, human," Strike hissed, his scales showing resigned blue patterns. "I did not expect such sophisticated tactics from your species." Most people underestimate what you can accomplish with basic physics and a good understanding of structural engineering, Rex replied, checking to make sure the alien was not seriously injured. "Your species builds impressive cities. Surely you understand how forces and materials interact." "We build with modern tools and technology," Strike admitted. "We have forgotten the old ways of working with natural materials. Perhaps that is a mistake." Rex helped shift some of the lighter stones to make Strike more comfortable, while leaving the restraining weight in place. "Every species has different strengths. The key is learning how to use what you have instead of wishing you had what someone else has." In the distance, Rex could see other aliens approaching the canyon system. Some moved with the confidence of natural predators, others with the caution of survivors who had learned to respect their environment. The final phase of the test was about to begin, and Rex needed to be ready for hunters who would not make the same mistakes as their predecessors. He checked his water supply and equipment, then headed deeper into the canyon system toward terrain that would offer even greater opportunities for creative problem-solving. Behind him, Strike's emergency beacon began flashing as the trapped alien finally acknowledged defeat. Above, Shade continued her careful descent from the canyon wall, moving slowly to avoid triggering any more surprises. Rex had proven that humans could compete with stronger and more naturally armed species, but the hardest challenges still lay ahead. The final canyon opened up like a natural amphitheater, its circular walls rising 200 feet toward the darkening sky. Rex stood at the center of the space, his water nearly gone, and his body pushed to the limits of endurance. The extraction point lay just beyond the northern wall, close enough that he could see the landing lights of Commander Thane's transport ship waiting in the gathering dusk. But between Rex and victory stood the 4 deadliest competitors in the entire Academy class. They had tracked him through miles of hostile terrain, survived his traps and tricks, and learned to respect the supposedly weak human who had eliminated more than half the original field using nothing but rocks and cleverness. Gornax, the Bruthari, stood 8 feet tall and weighed over 400 pounds of solid muscle and natural armor. His forearms ended in hands that could crush steel, and his gray hide had deflected energy weapons that would vaporize most other species. He had earned his place in the final group by being simply too tough to stop. Whisper. The umbral flickered. At the edges of visibility, his shadow-shifting abilities making him nearly impossible to track or target. He had survived by avoiding direct confrontation and striking from ambush when his opponents were weakened by battles with others. His dark form seemed to absorb light itself, creating patches of absolute blackness that hurt to look at directly. Nova, the energy being, pulsed with barely contained power, his crystalline form glowing like a small star in the dim canyon. He could shift between solid and energy states at will, making him effectively immune to physical attacks while giving him devastating offensive capabilities. Lightning crackled between his fingers as he prepared for the final confrontation. Morg, the second Bruthari, was even larger than Gornax, but moved with surprising speed for something his size. His natural armor showed scars from dozens of previous battles, each mark a testament to his survival skills and combat experience. He had fought his way through the academy class by being more savage and ruthless than anyone else. Clever tricks. Human, Gornax rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. You have shown more cunning than any of us expected. But there is nowhere left to run, and tricks will not save you in direct combat. Rex stood in the center of the circular arena, apparently defenseless and exhausted. His survival pack lay at his feet, empty of everything except his geological survey kit and a few pieces of basic equipment. To the watching aliens, he looked like prey that had finally been cornered by superior predators. But Rex was not looking at his opponents. He was studying the arena itself with the focused intensity that had carried him through months of academy training and miles of hostile terrain. The circular canyon was not a natural formation, he realized. It was the result of specific geological processes that had created a delicate balance of forces hidden beneath the apparently solid floor. Ancient water flow had carved away the softer rock beneath, leaving the harder surface stone supported by a complex network of natural arches and pillars. The whole structure was like a massive house of cards, held together by precisely balanced stresses and loads. And Rex had spent 3 months studying the geological survey data for this entire region as part of his academy coursework. You are right, Rex said calmly, never taking his eyes off the stone patterns beneath his feet. No more tricks, no more running, just basic engineering principles applied to available materials. He knelt down and opened his geological survey kit, pulling out a small hammer used for testing rock hardness. The aliens tensed, expecting some kind of weapon, but Rex ignored them completely. He was reading the stone beneath his feet like a blueprint, tracing the stress patterns and load-bearing points that held the entire canyon floor together. "What are you doing, human?" Nova demanded, his energy form flickering with impatience. "This is not a geology class. This is combat." Rex found what he was looking for. A single point no bigger than his fist, where multiple stress lines converged, where the removal of one small piece of stone would cause a catastrophic chain reaction that would reshape the entire arena. He had seen similar formations at Demolition, sites where his father's crew used controlled explosives to bring down large structures. But explosives were not necessary if you understood exactly where to apply pressure. "You are all thinking about this wrong," Rex said, raising the geological hammer above the critical stress point. "You see this as a fight between individuals, but I see it as a structural engineering problem. The question is not who is the strongest fighter. The question is who understands the battlefield well enough to control it." Morg roared and charged forward, his massive frame shaking the ground with each step. Nova shifted to energy form and streaked toward Rex like a lightning bolt. Whisper disappeared into the shadows, preparing to strike from an unexpected angle. Gornax moved more cautiously, but with inevitable purpose, his forearms ready to grab and crush his small opponent. Rex brought the hammer down with precise force on the exact center of the critical stress point. The response was immediate and spectacular. The carefully balanced network of stone arches and pillars that supported the canyon floor began to collapse in a precisely controlled chain reaction. But this was not random destruction. Rex had calculated every angle, every force, every load transfer that would result from his single hammer blow. Whisper vanished into a suddenly opening crevice as the shadow-filled corner where he had been hiding simply ceased to exist. Nova's energy form was scattered and dispersed as the crystalline formations he used to maintain cohesion crumbled around him, disrupting his molecular matrix and forcing him back into solid form just as a carefully calculated rockfall buried him under tons of precisely placed debris. Morg found himself trapped in a stone maze that formed around him as the floor shifted and buckled, according to Rex's mathematical predictions. The massive Bruthari's strength was useless against walls that kept rising higher as supporting pillars collapsed in exactly the right sequence. His roars of frustration echoed through the transformed arena as he realized he was caught in a geological prison designed specifically to counter his size and power. Gornax, the most dangerous of the four, had been Rex's primary concern. The first Bruthari was too smart to be caught by the same tactics that trapped his companion, and too tough to be stopped by falling rocks. But Rex had planned for this as well. As the floor collapsed around him, Gornax found himself standing on a small island of stable stone surrounded by a maze of crevices and unstable rubble. The Bruthari could have jumped across the gaps, but Rex had positioned himself on the only other stable platform in the entire arena. To reach the human, Gornax would have to cross 20 feet of treacherous terrain where every step might trigger another collapse, and Rex was not finished with his engineering solutions. Impressive, human, Gornax called across the transformed battlefield. You have eliminated 3 opponents without laying a hand on any of them. But I am not so easily trapped. I can reach you, and when I do, your cleverness will not save you from my strength. Rex nodded respectfully. You are absolutely right. In a direct physical confrontation, you would win easily. But that is not the kind of fight we are having. He reached into his geological kit and pulled out a small device that looked like a simple measuring instrument. But Rex had modified it during his months at the academy, turning the basic geological sensor into something much more sophisticated. He pressed a button, and ultrasonic vibrations began pulsing through the stone beneath their feet. The modified sensor sent precisely calibrated sound waves deep into the fractured rock formations around them. Rex had mapped every crack, every weak point, every stress concentration in the arena during his earlier survey work. Now he was using harmonic resonance to trigger specific failures in exactly the sequence he needed. Gornax started across the gap, his massive weight causing small stones to shift and fall with each step. But as he reached the halfway point, Rex's ultrasonic device found the resonant frequency of a key support structure. The vibrations built up gradually, like an opera singer shattering a wine glass with a sustained note. The collapse, when it came, was surgical in its precision. A single pillar of stone 30 feet away cracked and fell, which caused a domino effect that reshaped the entire maze around Gornax. Instead of blocking his path, the new rockfall created a funnel that guided the falling debris in a specific direction, away from both fighters but effectively cutting off any possibility of retreat or alternative routes. Gornax found himself in a narrow corridor of stable stone that led directly toward Rex's position. But the corridor was also a trap. The walls were unstable, held in place by carefully balanced forces. Any attempt to break through them or climb over them would trigger massive rockfalls that would bury even a Bruthari under tons of debris. You see, Rex called out, I am not trying to defeat you through superior strength or weapons. I am simply controlling the environment to limit your options. You can reach me, but only by following the path I have prepared for you. Gornax studied. The corridor, with the eye of an experienced warrior. He could see the trap, could understand how Rex had channeled all of his possible approaches into a single controlled route. But he also understood that he had no choice but to spring the trap if he wanted to reach his opponent. "What happens when I reach you, human?" Gornax asked, as he began moving down the prepared corridor. "You cannot run anymore. You cannot hide behind falling rocks. When I get within arm's reach, what will your engineering solutions do against 400 pounds of muscle and bone?" Rex smiled and pulled his final tool from the geological kit. It was nothing more than a simple pry bar, the kind used to move small rocks and test the stability of stone formations. In the hands of someone Gornax's size, it would be useless as a weapon. But Rex was not planning to use it as a weapon. "That is the wrong question," Rex replied, positioning himself carefully at the end of the corridor. "You should be asking whether you can reach me at all." Gornax was now only 10 feet away, close enough that Rex could see the determination in his alien features. The Bruthari's 4 arms were spread wide, ready to grab and crush his small opponent the moment he came within range. There was no doubt about the outcome of a physical confrontation between them. Rex waited until Gornax was 5 feet away, then jammed his pry bar into a carefully prepared crack in the stone floor directly beneath the Bruthari's feet. The trap was not designed to injure Gornax, or even to stop him permanently. Instead, it was calculated to do something much more sophisticated. The pry bar triggered the collapse of a small section of floor that dropped the Bruthari exactly 3 feet down into a perfectly fitted depression in the bedrock below. Gornax was not hurt, but he was effectively trapped. The depression was just deep enough and exactly the right shape to prevent him from climbing out, even with his massive strength and reach. Rex had essentially created a custom-built prison, cell using nothing but his understanding of geology and the Bruthari's own body measurements. "Impossible," Gornax said, testing the walls of his stone prison and finding them solid and unclimbable. "How did you know exactly how deep to make this trap?" "I measured you," Rex replied simply. "Height, reach, center of gravity, everything I needed to calculate the precise dimensions required to contain someone with your physical capabilities. Basic anthropometric engineering applied to available materials." Rex looked around the transformed arena, where 4 flashing emergency beacons marked the positions of his eliminated opponents. The entire canyon had been reshaped according to his calculations, turned from a natural amphitheater into a complex machine designed to neutralize specific threats using nothing but gravity, leverage, and structural engineering. Commander Thane's transport ship descended into the arena with a roar of engines that echoed off the newly formed canyon walls. The grizzled veteran emerged from the ship and surveyed the scene with obvious amazement. His tentacles writhed behind his helmet as he took in the scope of Rex's engineering achievement. "Remarkable," Thane said, his voice carrying clearly in the transformed space. "You turned the entire battlefield into a single massive weapon. I have never seen anything like this in 30 years of military service." Rex helped medical teams extract his unconscious opponents from their various geological prisons. Each alien was physically unharmed but completely neutralized, their natural advantages rendered useless by terrain that had been engineered specifically to counter their abilities. "My species might not have claws or energy weapons or natural armor," Rex said as he gathered his equipment. "But we have been turning rocks into tools for over 1,000,000 years. We understand materials and forces and structural relationships in ways that might seem primitive to more advanced species, but those basics still work regardless of what technology you have available." Commander Thane's tentacles writhed in. What Rex had learned was alien laughter. "Indeed, Engineer Williams. Welcome to the elite corps. Something tells me the galaxy is about to learn why humans are considered the most dangerous species in known space, not despite their limitations, but because of how they overcome them." As rescue teams worked to extract the other competitors and restore the arena to its original configuration, Rex looked up at the stars and thought about his grandfather's words. When you cannot match their strength, outthink them. It was a lesson that had served humanity well for millions of years, and it would serve them well among the stars as well. The test was over, but Rex's real education was just beginning.